Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
As Judge Claire Benson's gavel struck the bench, she began to rise, her ruling echoing in my ears. Elaine Carter was awarded the house, with me still responsible for the mortgage and utilities. Half the business I had built from the ground up was now hers. She got to keep her car, I got to keep making the payments. Custody of the children, gone. Reduced to weekends and 2 weeks in the summer. On top of child support, I was ordered to pay her maintenance, $2,000 a month for a woman who hadn't worked in 5 years. It was more than a ruling. It felt like a dismantling of my life, piece by piece. As the judge pushed her chair back, preparing to leave, I felt something rise within me. A single word escaped my lips, a word that would change the course of everything and consume the months ahead. No. Judge Benson's face darkened as I spoke, her eyes narrowing into slits of pure rage. It was clear that in her courtroom, dissent wasn't something she encountered often, if ever. Her fingers gripped the edges of her desk, knuckles whitening as though the wood beneath them might splinter under the pressure. "Mr. Carter," she said in a slow, measured tone that barely contained her simmering anger. "You do realize that this court has ruled, and you are obligated to comply with the decision, correct?" "Oh, I realize it," I said, leaning forward just slightly, letting a small, defiant smile curl my lips. "But just because you made a ruling doesn't mean it's over. You see, the thing about your decisions, Judge, is that they can be appealed. I'm well within my rights to challenge this injustice." Her nostrils flared as she sat back in her chair, clearly unused to being spoken to in such a manner. "You are testing my patience, Mr. Carter," she seethed. "And you," I responded calmly, "are clearly struggling with a simple concept. Are you confused with the in or the o? If you're having trouble with that word, I'd be happy to define it for you." Judge Benson's face went slack for a second, her shock evident as if she had never been so brazenly challenged. The surprise quickly morphed into an expression of pure fury. The icy glare she shot in my direction could have frozen the surface of the sun. "Excuse me," she barked. "I'm not sure what is difficult to understand," I said, keeping my voice even. "But let me help. The word is no, it's as simple as that." The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. The tension hung heavy in the air, but I didn't care. I had planned for this moment. The next few minutes were going to be the most satisfying of my life. The wheels were already in motion, and Judge Benson had no idea what was coming. "I'll give you 1 minute to apologize, or I'll hold you in contempt of court." "Well, at least you'd finally make one correct ruling today, then." "I have nothing but contempt for this mockery of a trial," I retorted. My lawyer was whispering harshly in my ear, fumbling through his briefcase, probably searching for something to stop me from speaking. "In that case, let's see how you feel after 30 days in jail," she snapped, banging her gavel. Wow, I didn't realize we were suddenly in Australia with all these kangaroos around. My lawyer was nearly shouting at me to stop, even trying to cover my mouth. 60 days. "Want to keep going?" she added, eyes narrowing. "You know, your dishonor. I honestly think if you got laid every once in a while, you wouldn't be so miserable. Why don't you take this?" I lifted my right hand, flipping her off, "and shove it up your dried-up excuse for a—" My lawyer's attempts to silence me only fueled my anger as I lifted my other hand with another middle finger. "Then take this one and shove it where the sun doesn't shine. Maybe then, you'll feel something and stop being such a man-hating psycho. Honestly, you're in more desperate need of a stick than anyone I've ever seen." Wow. I was certain someone was going to call 911 at any second. I figured one of two things was about to happen. Either she was going to have a stroke, or her head was going to explode. Honestly, I was surprised we couldn't see smoke coming out of her ears. I didn't think a person's face could turn that shade of red. The way she was glaring at me, I could practically feel death rays coming from her eyes. Oh yeah, she was pissed. 90 days, she spat, and I swear her voice sounded like it came straight from the depths of hell. Lucky for my lawyer, that's when the bailiffs grabbed me. He looked so defeated that I almost felt sorry for him. Everyone in the courtroom seemed frozen in shock, but I just couldn't help it anymore. I burst out laughing, hysterically, which probably explains why I had a few visits from psychologists during my time in lockup over the next few weeks. The letter from my lawyer's firm the next day, dropping me as a client, didn't exactly come as a surprise. Now, you're probably wondering what led to all this. Let me back up a bit. My name is David Carter. I'm 31 years old, born to a decent, middle-class couple in the heartland of America. I grew up with traditional values. You knew right from wrong. You respected those who deserved it. You didn't cheat. And when you gave your word, it meant something. Work hard, be generous, and stick to your principles. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Of course, people tend to forget there's another side to that. Do unto others as they've done unto you. Sure, the Christian thing to do is turn the other cheek. But that's never been my strong suit. I've always been told I have a stubborn streak that can get pretty intense. Combine that with my strong sense of justice, and, well, things sometimes got a little ugly. Once I decided someone had wronged me, there was no convincing me to change course. I became relentless. I remember one time in high school when I was dating Paula Grant. We'd been together for a couple of months, and like most teenage relationships, we had our arguments. One day, we had a fight. I don't even remember what it was about, and we broke up. I say that in quotes because, honestly, it was understood that it wasn't going to last. We'd done this before, where we'd break up, cool off for the weekend, and then apologize and get back together by Monday. But that particular Saturday, as I was walking past the theater, I saw something that set me off. My cousin Walter, who was more like a brother to me, was walking into the theater with Paula. Two things about this. First, Walter and I were the same age and had grown up together. His family lived just down the block, and we'd always been close, practically inseparable. Second, I knew he liked Paula. He knew we had just broken up, but he also knew it was probably temporary. That's why what he did felt like the ultimate betrayal. Friends, or family, don't do that to each other. From that moment on, Walter was dead to me. On Monday, when Paula tried to talk to me, I acted like she didn't exist. At church on Sunday, Walter came up and tried to explain himself. I just stared at him in silence and walked away. His family came over for dinner that same day, and I ignored him completely. He tried to play video games with me afterward. I put down the controller and went in my room. Our parents tried over and over to get us to talk, but I wouldn't budge. A year later, even after I stole his girlfriend out of pure spite, I still refused to speak to him. He confronted me about it, and yeah, I kicked his butt, but that was the end of it. He sent me an invitation to his wedding a few years later. I ignored it. And when I married Elaine, I made sure every family member got an invite, except him. All right, so I'll admit it. I can be an a-hole, and I definitely hold grudges. But here's the thing. I only hold on to it when someone screws me over on purpose. If it's an honest mistake, I can let it go. But what Walter and Paula did, that was deliberate, and I don't forgive that. Now, I get that some of you are probably thinking I'm a jerk. If that's the case, let me push your buttons a little more. I firmly believe in accountability. If you screw up, you should face the consequences. If you can't handle the outcome, then don't make the mistake in the first place. Like driving drunk? You deserve to lose your license, pay more for insurance, and whatever else the law throws at you. If your job relies on your driving and you lose it, that's what I call a stupid tax. You chose to take that risk, and now you pay for it. Same goes for other things. If a girl chooses to have unprotected sex and ends up pregnant at 18, her stupid tax is becoming a mom. And if a guy gets his prom date pregnant, he should be stepping up and taking care of that kid. It's called personal responsibility, and I shouldn't have to clean up after someone else's stupidity. So, yeah, I worked hard in high school, kept my grades up, and scored some good scholarships for college. I did fine with the ladies, too, while still maintaining my grades. I've always been on the better-looking side, and I made an effort to stay healthy. Sure, I got into my share of fights in high school, mostly because of my views, but I won more than I lost. After graduating with a degree in economics and a minor in accounting, I went on to get my MBA. Landed a solid job with a big company, making really good money. Being single and not having many expenses, I started playing the stock market on the side. Turns out I had a knack for it and made some decent profits. After a few months at my job, I met Elaine at a party, and we hit it off right away. I asked her out on a date, and things took off from there. Honestly, she was stunning. I know it sounds cliché. What guy doesn't think his girlfriend is beautiful? But with Elaine, I could say that confidently. People would stare whenever we were out, and all my friends joked about making a move if we ever broke up. Eventually, I popped the question. She said yes, and we got married. To give some context, Elaine went to college and graduated with a degree in art history, which, as I like to joke, qualified her to work as a Starbucks barista. I also joke that she went to college for her Mrs. degree. Basically, to find a husband and put off adulting for a while. Yes, I know. I'm an arrogant prick, but whatever. We settled into married life pretty easily. Elaine quit her job a week before the wedding and embraced the role of homemaker. Our sex life was great, and we bought a nice 3-bedroom house. I was doing well at work and making good money with my stock market investments. We lived comfortably but didn't go overboard, which allowed us to save a lot. I funneled all my bonuses into investments and maxed out my Roth contributions, with the goal of retiring before 40. I was excelling at my job, earning hefty bonuses and promotions, and climbing the corporate ladder quickly. A few years into our marriage, I came home one Friday evening to find Elaine all dressed up, looking incredible and grinning from ear to ear. "Hurry up and get showered and changed. We're going out to celebrate tonight, Daddy." Holy crap. Did she really just say what I think she said? I was stunned. Sure, we've been trying for a few months, so it wasn't completely out of the blue, but hearing it actually happen was a shock. I immediately grabbed her, spun her around, and covered her face with kisses. Knowing our celebrations would be more low-key soon with her pregnancy and then the baby, we decided to really go all out that night. The next several months were filled with excitement and getting ready for the new addition to our family. Then we got another surprise a couple of months later. Twins? We were having 2 baby girls. I couldn't wait to spoil them and have 2 little daddy's girls wrapped around my finger. I felt like I was on top of the world. The big day finally arrived, and after rushing to the hospital, our 2 little girls were born a few hours later. They were perfect, healthy, beautiful, with all their fingers and toes. Because they were twins, they had to stay in the hospital a bit longer, but everything turned out fine. When we brought them home, both families were there to welcome us, and everyone was thrilled. I couldn't help but notice my mom staring at them constantly. She was beyond happy that I had finally given her the grandchildren she'd always wanted. Life had taken a big turn for us. I realized that working for the large corporation was pulling me away from my family too often. Financially, I was in a very good place, so I decided to start my own business. Since I had been doing well with investments and the stock market, I got the necessary certifications to launch my own investment firm. I had already been helping some friends and family informally, so I approached them about becoming my official clients. That got the ball rolling. After opening, several former colleagues transferred their portfolios to me, and within a year, I had built a solid client base. Word spread, and many of my clients' friends were considering moving their business to me as well. But when you're on top, the only way to go is down. It was our daughter's 2nd birthday, and we had turned it into a huge celebration. Sure, she wouldn't remember it, but it was important to us. The idea was that she could enjoy the videos when she was older. Family from both sides had come, and we were all having an amazing time, until it happened. I had just finished using the in-suite bathroom in the bedroom because the hall bathroom was occupied. Just as I was about to open the door, I overheard my mom talking to her sister in the hallway. "I just can't figure out where those blue eyes came from," my mom said. "Have you asked David about it?" my aunt replied. "Oh God, no. I can't even imagine what would happen if he found out the girls weren't his. He's so happy. Finding out would destroy him." I couldn't bear to listen any longer. Quietly, I backed away from the door and returned to the bathroom, locking it behind me. My mind was racing. The girls had to be mine. Surely, someone in our families had blue eyes. My own eyes were a dull brown, and Elaine's were more hazel. I tried to recall every relative in both of our families, searching for someone with blue eyes. The only person I could think of was my cousin Mary, but her green eyes came from her father's side, and he wasn't a blood relative. As for Elaine's family, I couldn't remember anyone with blue eyes. After what felt like an eternity, I told myself I needed to calm down and rejoin the party before anyone noticed my absence. Somehow, I managed to push down my emotions, put on a smile, and return to the festivities. It was torture for the rest of the day, but I played the role everyone expected of me, all while silently planning my next steps. Eventually, the party wound down, and the guests left. Later that night, as I put the girls to bed, I closely studied their features. Some traits clearly came from Elaine, but others I couldn't place. There was nothing that I could definitively say came from me. The following day, while Elaine napped with the girls, I sat down at my computer. I ordered a few supplies to be discreetly delivered to my office, using a company credit card so the invoice wouldn't show up at home. I also started researching local private investigators. The suspicion that Elaine might have cheated on me nearly 3 years ago was now consuming me. If she had, was she still cheating? I needed proof, one way or another. A few days later, the supplies I'd ordered arrived. I had also met with a PI firm and hired them. I provided all the necessary information about Elaine's phone, tablet, and laptop for them to hack into. At the same time, I started shifting my finances around. If it turned out that she wasn't cheating and the girls were truly mine, these changes wouldn't affect anything. But if my suspicions were correct, it would ensure that none of that money would be within her reach. No way was I going to fund her betrayal, and I certainly wasn't going to pay for someone else's kids. The girls were innocent, yes, but so was I. If she wanted to sleep around and get pregnant by someone else, let him pay for it. Nothing was finalized yet. I was just waiting for the proof. 2 weeks later, the letter arrived at my office. I locked my door before opening it. When I saw the results, I broke down and cried for an hour. Deep down, I had known they weren't mine, but I had been clinging to the hope that I was wrong. The next day, I met with the PI, who handed over all the evidence. It was her personal trainer, the one with blonde hair and blue eyes. She was still seeing him a couple of times a week, and worse, she had been bringing the girls to his apartment so he could spend time with his daughters. The audio recordings confirmed that they both knew who the real father was. I had an appointment with a divorce lawyer the following afternoon. I wasn't naive. I knew the legal system was going to strip me down and take everything, but I wasn't about to just roll over. The lawyer gave me his advice, which I promptly rejected. He explained how the law worked. I explained how I worked. He said it wasn't about fairness, it was about providing for the kids. I told him her and her lover could handle that without me or my money. I laid out my demands and left. I could tell he was beginning to regret taking me on as a client. Little did he know what was coming next. I told the lawyer to draft the documents, but to hold off on filing until I gave the green light. I might have let him believe that I was considering working things out with Elaine. All right, I completely lied about that. It took 2 months to get everything in place, and during that time, Elaine hadn't suspected a thing. Thank God for that drama class I took in my junior year as an elective. I played the role perfectly. By the time I was done, on paper, I had zero net income and zero assets, apart from the house and an old Chevy pickup. The house still had a hefty mortgage because we had refinanced and pulled out the equity for upgrades, so selling it probably wouldn't even cover the brokerage fees. As for my Lexus, it technically belonged to the company, not to me personally. I had stashed about $10,000 in cash to get by for the next couple of months. Elaine was caught completely off guard when my cousin Howard and his wife Paula showed up that weekend. I explained that they had visited me at the office a couple of weeks prior. After some serious talks, they admitted to their wrongdoings, sincerely apologized, and I told Elaine I had decided to let it go. But come on, people are so gullible. Yes, Howard and Paula did come by last week, and yes, they apologized again, and I did forgive them. All of that is true. I'm an honest man, after all, but I might have left out a couple of minor details. Coincidences, really. Paula's family has a few members who, let's just say, aren't exactly shy about bending a few minor laws. Some of them are pretty big guys, too, and don't seem to mind getting into the occasional bar fight. While I don't put any stock in rumors, it's been whispered more than once that a handful of them might work as enforcers for a certain local business group with questionable ethics. Of course, that's just idle gossip from people who don't particularly like them. Though it's completely unrelated to this story, a couple of days before Howard and Paula came over, there was a news report about a personal trainer at a local gym who got mugged after leaving work. Apparently, the guy tried to fight off 5 attackers, which, in hindsight, wasn't his smartest move. They stole his wallet, took his car, and left him beaten to a pulp. Broken jaw, shattered nose, broken ribs, arm, dislocated kneecap, and both testicles ruptured. The police said there were no suspects, as the attackers all wore dark clothing, gloves, and ski masks. He'll be in the hospital for a couple of weeks at least. The doctors said the blonde-haired, blue-eyed victim should make a full recovery after reconstructive surgery and plenty of physical therapy. However, it's unlikely he'll ever be able to engage in sexual activity again. Over the coming months, he'll also find out that his car was chopped up and sold for parts, his credit cards were maxed out, his bank accounts drained, and his identity stolen and sold on the dark web. He's going to be dealing with that for years. Oddly, Elaine seemed really down and mopey for about a week after the mugging. My best guess is that she's worried about the rising crime in the area. I even offered to beef up the security around the house, but for some reason, that didn't seem to lift her spirits much. Monday morning, I called my lawyer and told him to finalize the divorce paperwork and file it. I wanted Elaine served late Friday afternoon. He tried to convince me to make a few adjustments, but I wasn't budging. By Tuesday, the forms were ready for me to review and sign. I met him at his office to finalize everything, and he once again cautioned me against my plan. I figured, fine, I'd humor him. I gave Elaine the house and even threw in the investments. Of course, I made sure the stipulation was clear. I wouldn't pay a dime for anything else. If she wanted to keep the house, she'd have to cover the mortgage and utilities herself. Oh, and the investments? They hadn't had any money in them for over a month. I had no issue handing over 100% of nothing. What Elaine didn't know was that I had been quietly moving all my tools and equipment out of the garage. I had also been relocating things I wanted to keep from the house, mostly from my home office. The larger items were being stored at Howard and Paula's ranch, while the smaller, less valuable stuff was going to a one-bedroom apartment I had rented. The apartment complex, interestingly enough, was owned by an offshore LLC with owners who were practically impossible to track down. Friday morning finally arrived. I went to work as usual, but a couple of days earlier, Howard had helped me move my truck to the office, so I had everything ready. After dropping off my car, I hopped in the pickup and headed straight to the bank. I emptied all the accounts, leaving only $100 in both checking and savings. Afterward, I cleared out the safety deposit box and drove everything over to the ranch, stashing the cash and the contents of the box with my other belongings. I wasn't about to risk opening a new safety deposit box at another bank and having it seized, nor did I want to leave a trail through a wire transfer. Cash would be more useful down the line anyway. You might be wondering why I was so comfortable trusting Howard and Paula. It's actually pretty simple. The mortgage on their ranch was being held by an offshore LLC with some, let's just say, complicated ownership. And even though Howard and I had our disagreements in the past, he's still family. In our family, you don't screw with blood. That's a principle we all take seriously. There was a lot of relief within the family when Howard and I finally buried the hatchet. By late morning, I headed back to the house. I parked a couple of blocks away and checked the GPS I'd installed in Elaine's car. Sure enough, she was at the mall, just as I'd expected. I hurried home, pulling into the driveway. Over the last couple of days, I'd already packed up most of my clothes and belongings and stashed them in the garage, ready to go. I quickly loaded the boxes into the truck, then headed inside to grab the rest of my clothes straight from the closet and dresser. No packing, just grabbed them by the armload, hangers and all. A couple of trips later, and everything was loaded into the truck. I didn't even bother closing the garage or front door. As I was about to leave, my phone rang. It was Elaine. I figured her credit cards must have been declined at the register. I glanced at the GPS and saw her car heading toward the house. Laughing, I tossed my phone onto the table, took one last look at the house, and walked out the door. A few minutes later, I was several blocks away, out of reach. Once I got to my new apartment, I transferred everything from the truck into its place. After a few beers, I had everything put away and finally settled into my recliner. Just as I started to relax, my new cell phone rang. Only a handful of people had that number, and my soon-to-be ex-wife wasn't one of them. "Hello," I answered. "She's been served. You should have the video shortly," said the voice on the other end. "Okay, thank you," I replied before hanging up. Sure enough, about 15 minutes later, the video came through to my email. To say Elaine was shocked would be an understatement. Unfortunately, the video only covered the moment she was served up until she dropped to the floor like a sack of rocks. The server checked to make sure she wasn't hurt, then left. That's where the video ended. I would have loved to see her reaction when she finally read the divorce petition and realized I had DNA evidence, along with video proof of her infidelity. From there, the whole process moved at the pace of a glacier. I started getting a flood of phone calls. Some were from my old office, where she had called multiple times, trying to reach me. Apparently, she didn't believe them when they told her I had resigned and hadn't worked there for 2 weeks. Eventually, she even showed up in person, demanding to see me. That didn't go well. It took the police being called to have her escorted off the property. Howard called me a few times as well. Apparently, she had been harassing him, trying to get through to me. I think she finally pieced together that his sudden visit was a little too coincidental with my decision to divorce her. Restraining orders were filed against her on behalf of both my former company and Howard before she was forced to leave them alone. It took 2 weeks for my lawyer to finally get in touch with her to find out who her legal representation was. To my surprise, she hadn't hired anyone yet. Money was becoming an issue for her. She was quickly running out of funds. All she had was the cash in her purse and a mere $200 left in the bank accounts. It seemed she was starting to lean on her parents for financial support. Meanwhile, I was just enjoying my time, relaxing and not rushing into any projects. I had no intention of being available for her, and I didn't want anything lying around that she could take from me. Eventually, she did manage to get a lawyer, and meetings were scheduled. I declined to attend, instead giving my lawyer clear instructions. My position was firm, not a single penny more. I heard that tempers flared during those meetings. It ultimately led to arbitration, which I had to attend. And let me tell you, it did not go well. "Where's all the money?" she shouted at me, her voice dripping with anger. "What money?" I shot back, feigning ignorance. "All our money," she insisted, her frustration palpable. "We don't have any money. We are flat broke. In fact, I'm living in the cheapest one-bedroom apartment I could find, And that was the truth. It was cheap because I happened to know the actual owner of the complex. Where's all the investments, the checking, the savings? Gone, I replied, shrugging nonchalantly. I made a really bad investment. Did investing in a cheating wife count? I wasn't sure, but I continued. Lost it all? Well, that part was true. I didn't have a clue where all those offshore accounts actually kept their cash. My lawyer casually stated, "We're giving her the house," with her name as the only one on the title. He could have been a bit more assertive, but instead, he sounded like someone surveying a tornado-ravaged home and pointing out that at least the debris hadn't caught fire. It's maxed out on the mortgage, and there's no way I can afford the monthly payments. Elaine screamed. It went downhill from there. Child support? Not my kids, not my issue. Spousal maintenance. That's alimony for the uninitiated? No job, no income, and no way. She's asking for 70% of the liquid assets? Good luck finding any. 50% of the business? Yeah, sure. Dream on. 50% of the retirement? What part of lost it all are you struggling with? Arbitration? Total disaster. Which brings us to our day in court. The presiding judge was the ever-dishonorable Judge Claire Benson. She had a reputation as the most man-hating, feminist family court judge you could imagine. Oddly enough, she was even harsher on men whose wives had cheated. But if it was the man who strayed, he'd practically need to be carried out of the courtroom after she obliterated him with her gavel. In short, I was screwed. So, you're probably thinking I'm about to get flamed for trying to convince them there was no money. You'd be wrong. I knew they could easily check the accounts from a few months ago and see the balance. I wasn't remotely surprised when the judge used those numbers to figure out exactly how much they'd squeeze me. The truth is, they had no way of accessing it. What I needed was time to move it around through different banks and accounts. I even went so far as to personally withdraw all the money from one bank, then split it up across several other banks in various accounts, under different names, of course. Paula's family dabbled in some shady businesses, including a gag gift shop that sold fake IDs for entertainment purposes only. It even said so on the cards. I had one that claimed I was Jesus Christ. My favorite prank was when someone would yell, "Jesus Christ," in frustration, and I'd whip out my fake ID, nodding along. The IDs were pretty convincing, and unless you read the entertainment bit, you wouldn't know they were fake. They normally went for about $50, but for a bit more cash, they'd accidentally forget to include the disclaimer. Afterward, I transferred the money electronically into even more accounts. Could it be tracked down? Possibly, but it would take a ridiculous amount of money and time. Months, maybe even years. By then, I'd be long gone. So, there I was, back in front of the man-hating judge. 60 days into my 90-day county jail stay. These short-term sentences were served locally, not in state prison. Have you learned your lesson yet? She sneered. You mean the lesson about not marrying a cheating 304? Yeah, I learned that one long before I ended up in your courtroom. I was referring to your attitude in my court. She shot back, and I could see the vein on her forehead bulging. Not exactly great for her blood pressure. Can't say I see anything wrong with my attitude, considering I was being railroaded by a bunch of kangaroos. At this point, I was genuinely concerned her blood pressure would break records during her next doctor's visit. You realize I can extend your stay in jail, don't you? And, if that's how you want to be, I'm adding another 30 days. Now, the reason I brought you here today is to discuss why you haven't made your first 2 child support or spousal maintenance payments. Where's your lawyer? Funny, I was under the impression judges were supposed to be smart. Thanks for clearing that up. Let me break it down so you might actually understand. I'll try to keep it at a 5th grade level, though I'm not sure that's low enough. Please, try to follow along. By now, I was worried her bench might catch fire from the flames she was practically snorting. At this point, it seemed pretty clear she didn't like me. I'm in jail. I have no access to any money. Because I have no access to money, I can't send any. Since you're the one who put me here, maybe you can explain why you are the reason the money isn't flowing to the slut you're trying to rob me for. Now, did you catch all that? Or do I need to slow it down for you? So, back to my cell for another 90 days, 30 from the original sentence, 30 from the judge's first tantrum, and another 30 from the final exchange. Honestly, it wasn't that bad. Sure, the food sucked, but I still ate it. I had a decent bed to sleep in and plenty of free time to relax. I made good use of the weights and exercise equipment, and I didn't have many problems inside. My courtroom antics had quickly made the rounds, which earned me some friends. Plus, Paula's family had a few connections that were useful, even on the inside. The only problem I ran into came courtesy of one of Elaine's less-than-bright cousins. He got it in his head that if he got arrested for something minor, he could spend a week in jail and use the time to teach me a lesson. The problem for him? Everyone in the jail knew exactly who he was before he even set foot in the yard, and it didn't take a genius to figure out what he was up to. He was spotted the moment he stepped inside. One of the guys accidentally ran into him while trying to catch a football, elbowing him in the gut. Once he recovered from that, he took a few more steps before getting nailed in the side of the head by a stray basketball. The guy who threw it apologized profusely, but another accidental elbow to the chin while he was being helped up wasn't quite as sincere. Still, he stubbornly pressed on. There were a couple more incidents before he finally reached me. He figured a sucker punch would do the trick since my back was turned. Unfortunately for him, I wasn't clueless. Before he even had a chance to wind up, I got the signal, spun around, and kicked him in the crotch as hard as I could. A perfect 65-yard field goal. After that string of bad luck, he got hauled off to the infirmary. 2 days later, he refused to come out to the yard and spent as much time as possible in his cell until his release. And here I am again, back in front of the evil queen. Are you ready to apologize? She asked. For what? For your vile outbursts in this courtroom. I honestly don't know what you're talking about. Whatever. Maybe you can at least manage to keep a civil tongue this time and avoid extending your stay. Oh, so another judge is taking over then? Boy, you're standing on my last nerve. Should I start stomping my feet now? I was seriously wondering if they had a suggestion box somewhere. I needed to suggest they post EMTs in the courtroom in case she actually stroked out. Once again, you haven't made a single child support or spousal maintenance payment. You've also failed to pay the mortgage or any of the utilities as I ordered. Didn't we already cover this? I can't pay anything while I'm stuck in jail. You put me here, so I can't work or make money. Second, those kids aren't mine, so why would I pay child support? Third, my ex-wife is a cheating 304, and I don't see why I should be funding her to 304 around on my dime. If she wants to screw everything that moves, she should get a job and finance her own sex life. Hell, maybe she could start charging for it and make some money that way. And lastly, you gave her half the business. She should have plenty of cash from that. Your Honor, Elaine's lawyer interjected. We've been unable to take possession of my client's portion of the business. It appears Mr. Nielsen sold the company to an overseas entity about 2 months before filing for divorce. At this time, we haven't even been able to identify the current owners to contact them regarding the court order. Just then, a striking woman stood up and requested permission to approach. Your Honor, I represent the board of directors of the company that purchased the business in question. I have a motion to dismiss the ruling that awarded Mrs. Carter any part of this business. It is highly irregular to grant ownership of a business that isn't a party to the court proceedings. Since the purchase was finalized before the divorce was filed, this company has no legal connection to this case. Therefore, we reject any claim of ownership by Mrs. Carter. But what about the money from the sale? Elaine whined. The ownership transfer and payments were made overseas. I'm not privy to those details, but my understanding is that the money from the sale never entered the U.S. and, as such, is not subject to U.S. laws. Any claim to that money will need to be addressed with your ex-husband, possibly in the country where the funds are located. What country is that? Asked Elaine's lawyer. The initial transfer of funds occurred in Sweden, the young woman responded, but it's my understanding that the money was transferred elsewhere shortly afterward. I have no information on where it went after that. Your Honor, my ex's lawyer spoke again. My client is in a desperate situation. The house is going into foreclosure because the mortgage hasn't been paid for 3 months. The utilities are about to be shut off. Her parents helped at the beginning, but it's becoming too much for them. My client has found a job, but she's waitressing at a local diner. It's nowhere near enough to cover the house expenses. Mr. Carter, the judge said sternly, you have 1 week to bring all the payments up to date. Oh, sure. No problem. I replied sarcastically. Let me just bend over and pull the cash out of my butthole. Oh, wait, there's nothing there. Sorry, I'm physically unable to comply. Maybe I haven't explained it clearly enough. I am in jail. I don't have access to the money you all seem to think I have. I can't work because I'm in jail, so I can't earn anything either. You keep thinking I've got stacks of cash lying around in my cell. Ask the guards. They search it every week. You keep ordering me to pay up, but don't give me the chance to do so. Mr. Carter, she continued, your lawyer can access your accounts and transfer the funds to your ex-wife. First of all, I said, as you can see, I don't have a lawyer. Second, what accounts? You keep mentioning these phantom accounts. But where are they? I've explained that I'm broke, but you refuse to believe me. And even if these imaginary accounts existed, do you really think I have the banking info memorized? I'd need access to my financial records to get the account and routing numbers. But none of that matters because the accounts don't exist. If you're so convinced they do, why don't you provide the account info? What happened to the money in your checking, savings, and investments? She asked. As I've said before, I made some bad investments. I took a risk and lost everything. And the money from the sale of your company? The company was struggling because of those same investments. I sold it for a low price and used the proceeds to cover debts. There's nothing left. Mr. Carter, do you seriously think this court is going to believe that nonsense? I shrugged. I really don't care what you believe. If you think I'm lying, show me where I'm supposedly hiding all this money. What I think is that she stole it all and is trying to screw me over while she's screwing her boyfriends. That doesn't even make sense. Elaine's lawyer shouted. It makes as much sense as keeping me in jail where I have no access to money, than demanding I make all these payments you want. I shot back. Mr. Carter, are you aware that I can keep you in jail until you pay? The judge asked. I stared at her like she had just sprouted a third eye. All right, I'll humor you. Go ahead. Keep me locked up where I'm completely unable to follow your orders while you keep demanding the impossible. Sounds perfectly logical. 3 months later, the house had been foreclosed on. Elaine had lost her Lexus because she couldn't afford the payments. She was now living with her parents because she couldn't afford an apartment for herself and the girls. She was working 30 hours a week at the diner. By now, they were pleading with the judge to release me so I could at least start making some form of payments. Loverboy had finally been discharged from the hospital and was in physical therapy, spending hours every day trying to untangle his financial mess. The only upside was that no new credit cards were being opened in his name, because by now, his credit score was so abysmal no one would issue him anything. He had minimal insurance coverage on his car, so he didn't receive a dime from that. And because he only worked part-time at the gym, he had personal health insurance with sky-high deductibles. It was going to take him years to crawl out from under his medical bills. I had finally hired a lawyer. She worked out a deal with the judge to release me from jail so I could get a job and start making payments. However, I had to surrender my passport because they were still convinced I had money hidden somewhere and deemed me a flight risk. I played by the rules and got a job at the local Taco Bell. By this time, I was staying at Howard and Paula's ranch. I knew I was being watched, as they suspected I had a secret stash of cash. It wasn't hard to figure out who was keeping tabs on me. They had to do it from the road since they couldn't legally step onto the property. Little did they know, most of the money was already in my hands. For the next 3 months, I worked that minimum wage job. Elaine had a court order to garnish my wages, but I wasn't bothered. Minimum wage didn't leave her much to take. During that time, I was quietly putting my plan into action. While I was in jail, Howard had cleared out my apartment, distributing my belongings among my extended family. A few weeks earlier, several packages had been sent from them, all to the same destination. Over time, various members of Paula's family would visit, and we even held a few barbecues with both Paula's family and mine. What the surveillance team missed was that our guests would quietly stop by the sheds behind the house, collect some packages, and discreetly load them into their vehicles throughout the day. In the following weeks, those packages were repackaged and sent away. I spent my time either working or at home, never going out. Taco Bell eventually had to get a restraining order against Elaine because she kept showing up to harass me about the money I supposedly owed her, causing too many disruptions. They could have fired me, but a little cash slipped to the manager kept me on the payroll. Whenever I needed to meet with my lawyer, she came over to the ranch. We had frequent meetings. Oh, did I mention my new lawyer? Of course I did. She was the one representing the new owners of my former company in court. After that case wrapped up, I hired her as my personal attorney. She's a real shark, or rather, I prefer to think of her as a barracuda, especially when she's skinny dipping in the pool. She's sleek, lean, and strikes when I'm least expecting it, particularly when I'm lounging naked at the edge of the pool. And yes, she has quite the appetite. What's that? You think it's unethical for a lawyer to sleep with their client? I said she's a lawyer, right? An ethical lawyer? You must be joking. Lawyers think scruples are some form of currency in Russia, and morals are just large murals. Now, about the money, yes, I did sell my company, but no, I didn't sell it to myself. I made sure Elaine wouldn't have any chance to sniff out the sale or use any legal means to claim a piece of the firm. I wanted the cash, plain and simple. Since the sale took place overseas and the money never touched U.S. soil, it was free from the reach of U.S. laws. The only way Elaine could get her hands on it would be if I deposited any of it in a U.S. bank, where it could be subject to the judgments against me. That wasn't going to happen. It was a lot of money. Add to that my investment accounts, which totaled around $10 million, and my cash on hand, safety deposit boxes, checking and savings accounts, and various safes, which added up to roughly $200,000. I had used some of the cash for my plans, but I still had around $150,000 left. And no, I wasn't planning on taking any of it with me when I disappeared. It was a gorgeous Saturday afternoon, and we were hosting another barbecue with the extended family. Everything was set, and the preparations were complete. The party was a blast. I helped Howard with the grill and smoker while Emily, my lawyer, mingled with the guests. Later in the afternoon, one of Paula's uncles approached me. He expressed his gratitude for my support to Paula and Howard and was happy that we had finally reconnected. After chatting for a while, he pulled out an envelope and handed it to me. I passed it over to Emily to keep it in her briefcase. As the evening progressed, I made a big announcement. The lien holder for the ranch had declared that the mortgage was paid off, meaning Howard and Paula now owned the ranch outright. This news sparked a huge celebration, and we partied hard into the night. As the night wore on and guests began to leave, Emily had to head out, as she had a flight to catch the next morning. She left with a group of 6 cars. Strangely enough, her flight was from an airport in the next state. She had packed everything in her leased car beforehand, going straight to the airport instead of stopping by her rented apartment. No one noticed the man slipping out of the back seat of her car in the parking garage, nor did anyone pay attention to the man casually walking about 50 feet behind her as they made their way to the international terminal. David Carter couldn't travel outside the U.S. since he had surrendered his passport to the court. Mitchell Nelson's passport went unnoticed, and no one gave a second thought as he and Emily held hands in adjoining seats, flying first class to Mexico City. Emily Brown seemed to vanish in the city, and in her place, Jamie Nelson joined Mitchell for their connecting flight to Ecuador. 2 days later, Alex and Olivia Bennett arrived at their hacienda on the Caribbean coast of Costa Rica, now proud members of the Mile High Club. Curiously, an old Chevy pickup that closely resembled the one that had disappeared from Howard and Paula's ranch awaited them at the hacienda. 2 weeks after the barbecue, a bench warrant was issued for David Carter. He had failed to show up for work 2 days after the celebration and was subsequently fired for not notifying anyone. Since then, no child support payments had been received by his ex-wife. When Howard and Paula were summoned to court, they were accompanied by a lawyer in a $5,000 skirt suit. She successfully argued that the couple bore no responsibility for their cousin, stating that he merely rented a room from them and had simply vanished one day. They even filed a suit against him for back rent, claiming he had driven off in his old pickup one afternoon and never returned. While no one truly believed their story, there was no evidence to disprove it. Over the following years, Alex Bennett found fulfillment, operating a small charter fishing boat while his wife, Olivia, managed their cozy cantina. They thrived in their small village, with their hacienda being one of the larger and more luxurious properties. Their life was simple yet rewarding, filled with the warmth of family and friends. Walter and Paula frequently visited, along with other relatives of Howard and Paula, creating a tight-knit community around them. As a couple, Alex and Olivia were beloved in the village, known for their generosity. They often donated to local needs and supported community projects. In addition to running their businesses, Alex took a keen interest in the stock market during his downtime, even helping some locals set up investment accounts and manage their finances. As for the once-feared judge Claire Benson, karma had a way of catching up with her. A few years after I had slipped away to Costa Rica, the man-hating judge found herself on the receiving end of betrayal when her wife, who, by the way, was a lesbian, was caught cheating. Judge Benson had adopted her wife's 3 children upon their marriage, and now she faced the same obligations she had imposed on others. She was stuck paying child support and maintenance to her ex-wife while dealing with the humiliation of seeing her ex move in a boyfriend who acted like part of the family. To add insult to injury, they were often seen out in public together, flaunting their new relationship as if they were a happily married couple, despite never officially tying the knot. Rumors circulated that they had finally set a wedding date, timed conveniently for 1 week after their youngest son graduated from college. Until then, Judge Benson remained shackled to her financial obligations, a bitter irony given her previous judgmental attitude toward others. The timing of the wedding was deliciously ironic, as it would come just after all her obligations to her ex-wife were satisfied, leaving her free of the very burdens she had imposed on countless others in her courtroom. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.